Welcome back to another episode of Lessons for Tomorrow, the podcast that is centered around conversations between industry experts, sharing insights from the past to apply in the present to achieve success in the future. As a reminder, this podcast should be the motivational poster in your ear. Each episode is centered around conversations to motivate you to tackle new initiatives at your organization. Today, we're going to be talking about B2B marketplaces in the commerce space, and I'm thrilled to have Cwik from AmericanEagle.com here and Yoav Kutner from Oro Commerce. Derek, and why don't you start off with introductions, and then we'll move on to Yoav.
Hello, everybody. Cwik. I've been with American Eagle for a baker's dozen, 13 years. When I started my career here, I was a enterprise e-commerce developer, doing a lot of the front-end and back-end integrations. Latter half has been really around solution architecting and engineering. Onboarded a lot of our great partners, such as Oro, from Yoav will be speaking with today, and help solution many of our big name clients. So happy to be here.
Wonderful. And Yoav?
Yeah. So my name is Yoav Kutner, as you pronounced perfectly, which is a rare occasion. So thank you. I am the co-founder and CEO at Oro Inc. And prior to that, I co-founded a company called Magento. So I've been in the e-commerce space right now, probably going on over 15 years. It's been evolving a lot. So I think we're going to share some of what we learned throughout the years and how we see the future kind of establishing for businesses that want to enable marketplaces around what they do.
Wonderful, wonderful. So exciting times. Last year, we saw a huge uptick in e-commerce, and especially, I think, just in forced digital transformation for the B2B e-commerce space at a faster clip than that they were typically moving at. They were moving in this direction, but unfortunately, the pandemic did move a lot more people online a lot faster than they expected, and especially in that B2B space. So as we just think about things today, with just that space overall, and I want to really hone in on marketplaces today. Just kind of in general, tell our listeners what is an e-commerce marketplace and describe for them just the advantages that a marketplace gives over just a regular e-commerce site.
You want to shoot first? Yoav?
Sure. So a marketplace is a gathering of sellers, right? And in the traditional kind of village days, it's where multiple vendors would come and sell their produce. If we are kind of jumping into today's digital world, eBay, probably one of the biggest marketplaces people know, Amazon, another one. So it's really multiple sellers selling to X, right, which is what we're talking about today, but traditionally to consumers, but now we're seeing an uptake on selling directly to other businesses, which is the B2B marketplaces. And we do see many different permutations of how this is actually established, or what's the reasoning even behind having it as a marketplace, allowing and enabling other sellers to sell. But in a nutshell, it's just bringing multiple buyers in touch with multiple sellers with many different nuances around that.
And I just jump in to say that on the sales side, for new business opportunity, we've seen a lot of requests for, hey, we're a small distributor manufacturer, and we need to compete against the big guys. And maybe we can help band together folks in our space that are competitors, but alike in the sense that we work in different regions or with different markets or verticals in a marketplace fashion to help compete against the big names. Everybody wants Amazon. That's Amazon Business is a big competitor to almost everybody these days. So they're trying to unite and compete.
If I had $1 for every time someone asked me in a project, I just want you to build me Amazon. That would just, I'd maybe have like $25, or Bitcoin. Yeah. Yes.
Well, I would say it's an average of $5,000.
Yeah, there you go.
That's our fees we were getting.
Yes.
It's going up a bit. I think they're understanding the complexity now.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
For our listeners stateside, I think for a lot of us, and for some like me, this is an emerging trend. For those overseas in Europe, the marketplace model is, I think, a lot more mature and is a lot more evolved than what we have here. So, Yoav being based a lot of the product overseas, I think they've got a competitive advantage of they've been in this space and they've got some lessons learned.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I want to talk about those models for a little bit here and just understanding, right? There's the model of the multi-vendor and B2C and B2B both serve, but there's also just B2B pure marketplaces or B2C pure marketplaces. And just where are you guys seeing just where the models have been and where the models are evolving into just in today's world, and where do you think they're going to be in the future?
Sure. So I'll take the first crack at this. So what we initially saw from B2B was actually a manufacturer or brand that wanted to enable or augment what they're offering to their customers through this marketplace, where they will allow either service providers that actually give services on what they're selling to their customers, or software that works on their products, or any other kind of items that are complementary to what the offering is that this brand or manufacturer is actually selling to their customers. And that was the traditional kind of thing we started seeing in B2B, and this is going a few years back already. I do think it's evolving. I do think that we're seeing a lot more kind of implementations that are different than this model where it's non-competing. We are seeing B2B marketplaces now that are offering competing sellers to sell on the same platform, which was more of the kind of Alibaba kind of way that they were presenting it. But it's something that we are seeing now as a growing trend in the US for US marketplaces, not overseas marketplaces, that's how they got connected to US buyers. So again, if we look at Alibaba, this was solving an issue where sellers that were US or EU for that matter, and wanted to purchase from a manufacturer or distributor in China and the Far East to actually get those products to them. It was very hard to for everybody to just go to China. So of course, online was a very valuable option. And when they would find a product, they would have multiple sellers, and they would go and select the seller, maybe even negotiate some pricing, and then buy that. What we are seeing today is that this is moving now to more and more companies that are trying to create this service, I'll call it, and they're a US side. So they might have other sellers that are US, they might have sellers that are international, or Europe for that matter. And again, they are enabling them to be connected to potential buyers. One of the reasonings we've seen for this, and this actually started before COVID, is like you said, that everything was moving online. So whereas a lot of these contacts were made in trade shows, in conferences, really started seeing that more and more of these interactions are moving online. And for a lot of these B2B sellers, it was very hard to compete, kind of catch up with the digital era, I'll call it, and going online. And these marketplaces are kind of enablers for them to actually be online, to have their products online, to meet new or get connected to new potential buyers. So this is mostly of the service we're seeing that these B2B marketplaces are kind of offering a lot of these sellers. And the reasoning why these sellers are interested in joining these marketplaces, again, the marketplace is acting as a focal point where they bring multiple potential buyers and introducing them to sellers. And the problem with this versus B2C marketplaces is that in a B2B scenario, usually we talk about a recurring relationship, meaning that this is not a one-time buy. So again, moving to the marketplace, it did allow a lot of buyers to kind of sample, if you want to say, products that are bought from a new seller that they're interacting with, and kind of build a relationship. And what we're seeing now is that it's evolving, because prior to what we've seen, if there was a successful relationship, it might have gone offline and the buyer and the seller would interact directly. After that, maybe even off the platform. But what we are saying is that now we're enabling them to have these relationships within the marketplace. So again, the marketplace is serving many more features rather than just establishing a new kind of buyer-seller relationship. And that can be from facilitating the recurring orders, facilitating payment, facilitating reviews, helping with any kind of issues on the order. So we're seeing that these marketplaces are evolving and are taking a much more major role in the buyer-seller interaction today in the B2B use case. And that's, again, before we even talk about all the permutations that we see for this, and I'll talk about it maybe a bit later, but in the trend that we're seeing is that, again, these marketplaces are becoming facilitators for buyers and sellers to interact, whereas they would not meet or would not find each other either other than being on this marketplace today.
Absolutely. And I think that's where, and Derek, I want your thoughts on this too, but really the venues for buyers and sellers are really just exploding because of the opportunity with the infrastructure, the payment security that are now available through a lot of the different tools like Oro Commerce that give them the advantage to getting that marketplace out there and really connecting their other systems to populate data into it.
Yeah, historically, and this is really with every digital industry. At one point, the world was challenged with a B2C application, right? Magento came about. The world was challenged with B2B applications. The world is now challenged with marketplace applications. So, for a long time, agencies like us didn't have a tool, and we'd have to custom build, custom dev, or repurpose. So you would try to level up a B2C or B2B application into a marketplace application, which maybe for somebody who's small, that's a viable path, but for many, it's not a long-term solution. Having a product that's focused on marketplace and all the components, it's not just the end use case of someone purchasing or procuring through the application, but it's the management, the vendor application, vendor payouts, inventory, order control, all of that stuff. You need an application that's dedicated towards those operations.
Yeah, and I think you brought up a great point there that I want to unpack a little bit more. Is just historically, B2C has been ahead of the curve of B2B, just in implementation of the technology or the ability to more quickly adapt newer technology. And B2B has been a bit more just systems were in place, they're working, why replace them? How do we, make that faster move? I think last year we saw a lot more businesses willing to shift to a faster pace. With that, though, you talked about how the B2C model of commerce really was brought to these marketplaces for B2B, and that evolution that happened was more stemmed from the opposite direction. With some of the newer approaches, you feel that more the B2B focus now, or at least in the marketplace space, the focus has been on what the marketplace solution needs to be and not trying to adapt an existing system to become that.
Yeah, and that's a great point, by the way. I think as a platform provider, what we are responsible for is building the building blocks, right? Giving you all the features, the underlying features that you will need in order to kind of implement your business model on top of the marketplace. And that's what we're learning right now. Again, all these marketplaces are very different when it comes from what is the service that they are providing, how are they making money, right? The business model around that. So just having a platform that has all the core features and allowing you to implement kind of your core business model on top of it, or your business domain on top of it, it's our role. So we really at Oro kind of try to build all the features that are relevant for B2B that we see across the board for everybody, and that will be the multi-vendor management, allowing them to actually manage their catalog, manage their orders in the system. Because again, like you said, you cannot rely on them on being technical or digital, right? So you have two different users, which is the buyers and of course the sellers, and both need access and the features that they need in order to actually operate on the marketplace. So I think one big difference that we see, probably the biggest difference that we see between B2C marketplaces and B2B marketplaces, is that B2C a lot of times has very thin kind of offering or features when it comes to the sellers. They do very specific things. When we talk about B2B, like we said, that is a relationship that usually is established between a buyer and a seller, and having them, the sellers in this case, have a lot of features that enable them to create and maintain this relationship is where we invested, right? So that's almost universal. All sellers need access to the customer, need access to create recurring orders around it, right? If it's answering questions, if it's updating the order timeline, manufacturing timeline, downloading even procurement information that they need in order to procure their products in order to be able to create those orders for their newer customers. So this is all things that the software as a platform needs to be actually enabling those sellers to do. And in B2C, it's very basic. You can upload products, you can update the order status, etc. So definitely that's the underlying kind of role that we're playing, is, like I said, enabling both the sellers and the buyers to have the features they need in order to interact in a B2B fashion. That said, another big one that we're kind of working on right now is changing how payments are done. And again, in a B2C scenario, we usually would talk about credit card payments, maybe money transfer, bank orders, etc. But there was a specific role that the marketplace played in that either there would be the merchant on record or they would pass it on to the actual seller, and they would have to have some predefined payment provided that they would accept. What we're seeing in B2B, because that B2B is not necessarily still caught up with the credit card world when it comes to that, we see that we actually have to support many different payments. And again, this is a big role that the marketplaces now are starting to play. And we have a customer that we're actually working on right now. They're one of the largest aviation marketplaces. And as you can imagine, the average order amounts that you're seeing in this industry can go anywhere from $10 to hundreds of thousands of dollars. And most credit card transactions will not support the large orders. So how do we actually enable and actually move faster this whole payment process? That's something we're actually investing a lot in right now. So establishing payment terms, establishing credit lines for the buyers, et cetera. That's where we're investing for the future of what's coming, I think, for B2B. And one of the biggest hurdles for B2B marketplaces is facilitating payments and actually redoing how payments are done in B2B, meaning that it's not necessarily direct between the buyer and the seller, and the marketplace takes a more major role and lowering the risk for both sides of the transactions.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up payment methods. I think that's one of the key areas of differentiation in the B2B space is really there's probably about four main ways to make a B2B payment, right? There's paper check, ACH transfer, electronic fund transfer, wires, and then credit and debit cards, right? And as you mentioned, those price ranges in those B2B marketplaces can range from things that absolutely can be done through a credit transaction, but then you get into those hundreds of thousands of dollars for either aviation, large parts, or whatever it may be that you're ordering in bulk, or what your industry specific needs are. But still, nearly half of B2B payments are still made by paper check. And I think that's just an incredible just number to think about, where we have all these different payment methods, but digital payment solutions have not been historically in that B2B space the common way of payment. And with that, digital payments are gaining traction in B2B space. More organizations are moving to digital formats of payment, but that additional of the financing, the terms, all of that come into play with how you build that. And a lot of times there's also different price lists that you have for different relationships. And all of that has to be managed inside of that marketplace. And you are updating that constantly. I think that's just such a huge effort that a system, when properly implemented, handles a lot of that for you. And you feed it in correct information. It can process through it. You know that for me, it's net 30. For Derek, it's net 90. He just never pays on time.
No way.
And then I prefer paper checks still, and Derek's going to go all digital with his Bitcoin and everything. So I think it's just
I think the price just went up again.
An area. Yeah, it did. So it's fun to watch that crypto market. But I just think it's so important for people to understand that you need to offer multiple payment options. You need to address the different ways that your individual buyers are going to want to experience purchasing from you.
Yeah, I think what you guys have both said pretty clearly is you've got to make it easy for the buyer to transact with your seller, and in a way that is traditional, right? Because they're coming from a way of dealing with this buyer-seller relationship, but in a digital format.
Yeah.
Right. You got to take that offline and convert it to online, and that it sounds simple, but everything that is simple is typically very hard behind the scenes. And that, again, that's where the orchestration of the software comes into play. Of, go ahead and try to repurpose a B2C platform for a marketplace solution or a B2B solution, and good luck. Right?
Yeah. No, exactly. And I think you have to look at the size of the market opportunity here too. And overall, and this is some stats that I got from payments research firm IBTSD, B2B marketplaces were expected to generate $3.6 trillion in sales by 2024. That's up from an estimated $680 billion. Okay, there's a difference there. $680 billion versus $3.6 trillion, and that $680 billion was estimated in 2018. So, I mean, that marketplace opportunity is just huge. That market is ripe for the taking. But again, if you repurpose existing platforms that aren't meant for this, you're going to struggle. You're going to invest a lot of time and energy into it when there's solutions that are available today out there. And let's unpack those a bit more and talk through just what are the platform, right? What's needed in that platform to truly support the B2B marketplace aspect? Is it the integration side? Is it customization side that you mentioned earlier of what a lot of B2B solutions needed before? What's some of the advantages to a platform today?
Yeah, and I'll just start by saying that even American Eagle is still paying Oro with paper checks. So I'm just gonna state that. So
funny
keep us all real.
Funny side note.
And we're a B2B relationship, right? I mean, we're two businesses and we still use paper checks. So again, it's definitely there, right? And that's an excellent point. I'll just finish with the payment so quickly. It's even more than that, right? It's I think we're talking about reducing the risk. So again, if you go into what the payment relationship is in a B2B, if it's a new buyer approaching a new seller, the seller has to become almost like a bank, right, or a credit issuer, because they have to kind of assume some risk and give some terms. Maybe the terms are not as good in the beginning and they grow. But again, we're talking about removing all that risk, meaning that we provide more value coming from the marketplace, that they will be the facilitator of the payments. So everybody gets paid on time. Everybody gets a control of the payments, gets better terms. Right now, one of the biggest issues in B2B is that most payment relationships are one-to-one, meaning that the buyer and the seller have a direct relationship. Now, if we open up the marketplace and say the marketplace has multiple buyers, multiple sellers, as a buyer, the marketplace already knows me, right? And maybe I can establish a better credit line across all of my orders and my payment history. And then when I reach out to a new seller, I don't have him to take a risk on me, because the marketplace already knows me and might give a credit score, might even issue the credit to me directly and issue the payment to the buyer. So again, that's the new things that we're working on right now, and I think that's very, very exciting. And it's really going to accelerate the speed of how commerce is being done, because I think one of the biggest hurdles right now is the payment, and especially when it comes to smaller buyers and smaller sellers. And again, if they interact with bigger ones on either side, they actually face a lot of risk and a lot of issues. So again, I think that's a very exciting one. Maybe we can have a whole podcast about that. Going back to your original question, what kind of features are really, really needed in a platform to be successfully implementing a marketplace? So you touched on pricing, and pricing is, again, very interesting, because if you look at most B2C marketplaces, they really provide kind of a single price per all buyers, right? So maybe different sellers will have different prices for the same item. That's one option, like on eBay. Or we go on Amazon, they might have more restricted pricing listings, but they will still allow every seller to basically give his own price. But that price goes to anybody that buys from them. Like we mentioned many times now already, the B2B relationship is a more recurring, more deep relationship. And as you establish this relationship, the buyer might start asking for bigger discounts, better pricing, et cetera. So just facilitating all these interactions of, okay, I've bought 1,000 units from you and I want to buy another 1,000. Can you give me a better price? So all this quote to order workflows, we need to enable those in the B2B marketplaces, because otherwise this will go offline, right? So if I found a seller that I really, really like as a buyer, and I want to buy from them on a recurring basis to establish this interaction, this relationship, you want this to happen on your digital platform. That provides many benefits to a lot of the different players. So, of course, for the buyer, I don't have to start going offline and assuming more risk that I maybe don't know who I'm talking to on the other side. I still go through the marketplace. For the seller, again, it provides them an ability to discuss and negotiate pricing and be competitive. And for the marketplace to get kind of the overall data and overall view of what's going on when it comes to pricing, and be able to promote this as part of their business model to some of the sellers, to some of their buyers as well. So they could have memberships, they could have kind of subscription models around this, where they're enabling a better view of the pricing, or better pricing even for their buyers, and the ability for the sellers to kind of determine that. And to support that has to be built into the platform, because we're talking about hundreds of thousands, if not millions and millions of products or SKUs. And then if we start thinking about that, if we allow individual pricing per customer, per product, we're talking about almost an infinite number of price books or price lists that we have to support in the platform. So this cannot be an afterthought. We cannot retrofit the B2C model where it's one price for every customer. Maybe we have customer groups and try to kind of customize it so it works. It's a lost cause. I mean, I've tried it in Magento many times and I failed when we were trying to implement it there. That's part of the reasoning why we created Oro, when we really pushed on this price engine and to be able to support that in infinite number of permutations. So we're basically loading the price directly for every customer. That, again, just to keep it clear, it could be that we're getting it real-time pricing as well. So we might be calculating the price on the fly or doing integration with a third-party system that actually provides us the pricing and the actual pricing that that customer will receive. And that means that we might have to have multiple integrations, which we do already, just to get pricing, just to load the pricing in an efficient way for the customer. So pricing is one of the biggest things. The second thing is the sales enablement, or that includes the CRM in it. And like we said, it's providing the seller with the right tools to interact with their customers and actually manage that relationship. And that's, like we said, the quote to order, but that can be any kind of customer support or customer service interaction that they need, order updates. It could be that the process in B2B doesn't start necessarily with adding to cart, right? As we think of in the B2C. In B2B, it might start from requesting samples. It might start from designing a solution, right? So before I'm ready to buy, I need to have a full interaction before I'm actually adding to some shopping cart or checking out or facilitating a payment. It's about building this relationship, and this can be a multi-tier. We have business to government marketplaces where the army can actually create orders on this platform, but way before they start the order, they have to open it up for bidding. So that's another kind of process that we have to support on this B2B marketplace, because they find the items that they have to purchase, but then it goes into a workflow of bidding, right? And multiple bidders have to actually bid on this contract before it actually gets awarded to anybody. So that's another thing that we have to support, and having this kind of very flexible workflow engine that allows us to create these very custom user experiences, and it can be a user experience for the customer, or the buyer. It could be a user experience for the seller, but those have to be very uniquely configured for every role in the system. So again, if we look at B2C, we look at a one-size-fits-all. We're trying to kind of cater to everybody that comes to the website in the most efficient way, easy in, easy out manner. In B2B, that's not the case. We might have to have a different workflow, a different user experience per the role of the user that's actually interacting. It can be the buyer, the seller. It can be a different user within the buyer or a different user within the seller, and they have to have a unique experience using the system. So again, a workflow engine approach, rather than deep customizing every process in the system, but having the ability to configure this and load the right user experience and the right workflow per the user that's using it. That's the second biggest key that we have to support in these platforms.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you hit on a very important point there that we haven't really talked about, is just B2G, right? With business to government, and how there are different realities of how business is done with government entities. But overall, the workflows is really where, I mean, Derek, in your experience in architecting solutions, I feel that that's where I've seen so much of the need really come in, is the different relationships, the different types of sellers, the sellers who might only have one or two people who are coming in and purchasing, and then the others who are larger organizations. They have different divisions, they have different price lists, they have different needs of what certain people are allowed to purchase or not purchase. I mean, how often are you seeing the need of these workflows to come into play versus that deep customization that Yoav mentioned?
So, funny story. Well, first off, I do want to comment on, I think I heard in there that Oro Pay might be coming or something along those lines. That's pretty cool.
We're working on that. Yep. I thought I would keep that to the announcement.
Okay.
Spoiler alert.
That's awesome. No, that's there's a lot of there's a big gorilla that's doing that as well on the B2C side, as we all know. We're also partners with. That said, when you mentioned something earlier that really struck a nerve, and that was, you guys are like building blocks, right? That's what the platform is, and that's critical, because We need, as an agency and implementer, building blocks to solve problems. We don't need a very rigid application that we've got to bend and then break to fit requirements. So every customer that we get that comes to us, every potential customer as well, is asking us to do something very unique. Always, right? No businesses are running the same. No marketplaces are running the same. They share common challenges, but the nuances are all unique, right? They're snowflakes. So the building blocks is critical, and we're moving in a world towards clicks, not code, right? And there's a buzzword for everybody. Heavy development is something that's required at times, but in many cases, business wants to manage a lot of the logistics and operations, and having a workflow tool often solves for that, right? Where you are clicking, configuring, and using a non-developer type application to execute on the requirements.
Yeah, and the B2B space and just the intricacies of each industry and each organization within that industry has always been one that I feel, and you mentioned it earlier too, everyone thinks it needs to be simple for what's delivered on the front end, for the process of going in and ordering, but the complexity of that back end, of all the systems working together, of all the inventory systems, pricing systems, the e-commerce systems, that's where the heavy lifting comes in. And that's the reality of it isn't something that you can just flip a switch and turn on overnight, like a Shopify site or a WooCommerce site on WordPress, where you can just dump some products in and do that. You have to think through those workflows, those integrations that are there. And I think that's one of the key things that we've seen, in the many years of working together, Derek. I'm not quite the baker's dozen yet. I'm one behind you. I'm a pure dozen. But with that, it is looking at the true customer journey that goes through and understanding that and really delivering for that. And there's some who are going to want to be communicated in one way versus another way, different channels. In the B2B space, how do we look at the different types of integrations? I think of CRM right now. There's so much centered around bringing that CRM to play, or CDP is really the new buzzword that a lot of people are dealing with. How do those play into the marketplace and the B2B side of commerce?
Well, yeah, I'll let Yoav speak more to this, but a key, why I got excited about Oro when I first learned about it many years ago and tracked and traced them until we got involved as a partner, was that they were building it from the perspective of a B2B business merchant up, right? That CRM centricity was a key pillar, a foundational component. And everything else evolves around that, because in the B2B world, as we've I think exhausted, it's traditionally a high touch, relationship heavy type of relationship for buying and selling. And to replicate that, CRM becomes paramount for business when you move digitally. And then everything else around it is more just the orchestration of those points of friction, right? Getting my pricing, getting my quote, getting my whatever, getting paid. That's where the platform needs to come in and automate, and that's where that's the mentality that Oro took with building up the platform.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we actually created a CRM before we created the commerce piece, right? And again, I pointed it out earlier that this is probably one of the biggest differentiators when it comes to B2C platforms and B2B platforms, because again, in the B2C platform, we're very focused on the consumer, on the front end, on the user experience on the front end, very little on who's actually working on the back end of the system. And that's for a good reason. I mean, the type of people that they're logging in are, definitely people that are managing the website rather than actually interacting with the customers. But when it comes to B2B, this is, again, it's a relationship, right? That we're not talking about one time. We're not talking about faceless customers. We're talking about a relationship. And one of the key pushbacks that we got from companies for not going digital, or if we were pushing them to go digital, pushback they were giving us was that the sales team would be very afraid that first, we may be coming to replace them, and second, they're going to lose the personal touch that they have with their customers. So we really wanted to touch on creating the user experience for the sellers, where they can actually be more efficient, they can actually interact with their customers better, get a better view in one place where they're actually doing work. So not making them sign into another system, CRM, just to update the pipeline so the sales managers can get a view of the pipeline and then build projections, but actually really use it, right? And have the transaction, be able to set pricing, be able to see the data about their customers, update the data about their customers. Maybe their customer had interaction or a bad interaction with the order delivery or with the customer service. The sales reps can see that now while they're talking to the customer. They can actually enable the customer to do stuff on their behalf, to have them more efficient by using the website. So that's key for a B2B platform, and that's from the B2B e-commerce to the B2B marketplace, really having two sides of the equation, the buyers and the sellers interacting in the system and actually having them work in a single system. That can be done through integrations, but what we've seen is that these integrations usually are clunky. They might have issues. You still might have sales reps logging into multiple systems to update, and any hurdle that we put in front of them will just help them push this away and not have the B2B platform at play. The second one was, or the first one I touched was that we're coming to replace them. But again, once we start building the right features that they need, they see that we're not replacing them. We're really enabling them. And that's another key to get them signed on board. And with all that, I really think that, in B2B, we have a great saying, and I'm just going to go back to the workflow and why it's very key to have the right user experience. We have a saying that the bigger B wins, right? And what do we mean by that? It means that if your buyer is a big company and you really want them to interact with a seller that might be much, much smaller, the big company will dictate how they want to have this relationship working, right? So just imagine Fortune 500 company needs to buy from a mom and pop store. That relationship won't work, right? I mean, it's very hard for this mom and pop store to actually work with this kind of big companies and all their processes and et cetera. By us creating features where we can have, for example, the workflow and custom tailor the user experience for different users of the big B, and have the big B determine how they need to interact with the system without going in deeply customizing for every use case, but having this workflow kind of approach will enable them to be able to use the digital platform. And on the other side, have a mom and pop store that actually just has to be plugged into that workflow and actually facilitate some of the transactions that are happening in that workflow. So we are enabling these big, huge bees and micro bees to actually interact and use the system in the way that they need to. Otherwise, again, they will not be able to use that. And that's true for, again, both sides of the equation.
Yeah, absolutely. And you bring up an interesting point there about the big bees and little bees, and I love the phrasing around it that you use. I would say on the big B side, some of the exciting and somewhat challenging projects have also been where we have had to deal with multi-warehousing and multi-org structure within organizations when we build out solutions. And so how is some of that being addressed today? I know a lot of times in the past when it was more that custom development, we really just kind of wrote custom warehouse inventory management and connected to the right pieces. But what does that look like today, or what does that look like in the future to you guys? How is that going to be solved as we start to look at just the shift that I would even say the pandemic has caused for a lot of organizations? I look at Best Buy, for example, is starting to convert a lot of their store space into distribution hubs. And Amazon has been building up multiple distribution hubs and how they're handling multi-warehouse aspects. How does another B2B organization that's not at the size of those companies deal with this?
Yeah, and I think, again, that's one of the biggest added values that these marketplaces bring. And what we are seeing is that sometimes these marketplaces don't start from somebody having an idea, I'm going to bring multiple buyers and multiple sellers. Some of them come from the fulfillment or logistics part of it, right? And they already figured the problem you just talked, and they do it maybe anyway, if they're a distributor, for example, right? So they might already have the warehouse network all over the States or Europe or the world even. And by them already doing that's the part they're doing. But adding the front end part to it, right, where they're allowing the sellers and buyers to interact on top of what they're already doing, that's just the missing piece. If you want to think about it, that's almost the easier piece of this equation, right? Because they already figured out the logistics, the warehousing, and the inventory and all that. And then usually that's an error. It's also easier for us because all we do is integrate with their existing systems to find the inventory. We push the orders down the pipeline, and they know how to work with the logistics. I think the reverse is the harder way, the harder one, right? So we are seeing marketplaces that are starting to be successful and are being pulled into becoming logistic companies. And even in the B2C space, Shopify, right? That's their play right now. They're trying to compete with Amazon and become, it's what we used to say in Magento. We were the biggest distributed marketplace, right, for B2C. And I think Shopify has this crown today, right? They have the most sellers and the most buyers. And what they're trying to figure out right now is the logistics. But guess what? That's the hard part, right? How to do the logistics, how to enable these sellers to be competitive when it comes to fulfillment and logistics. So definitely that's the one thing that I see is easier sometimes maybe for a distributor or logistics company to add the marketplace or commerce part to it. And we've done it very successfully with both distributors and logistic companies, and it works perfectly. But when we look the other way, it's it's almost out of our realm. It's because there is a lot of physical things that has to happen and a lot of physical relationship and stuff like that. So again, the best way we've seen is that either it's an existing infrastructure, or what we're seeing is partnering, right? So we see that the marketplace partner with logistics partners or warehousing companies to start building this kind of infrastructure. But that said, like you said, even Best Buy, even behemoths like Amazon are still figuring it out, right? Because it keeps evolving, and it keeps, the expectations, especially in the B2C, is that I order and I get it in a few minutes. Guess what? It's coming into B2B as well, right? I mean, we already have implementations where we have to commit to the delivery date, right? They need to know when they get the parts or when they get the products that they acquired. So we have to integrate deeper with logistics companies and get these data for them before they put an order in, which was unheard of in B2B. Before, I think you would put an order and then 3 months later you would start asking for updates, and maybe you would get them, maybe you would get some vague date. But today, again, digital is the way we live. Everything we, as buyers or et cetera, that we do in our private lives, we're expecting today in our business lives as well. So we're seeing a growing demand for that. And that's definitely one of the biggest hurdles, because it's not I've had experience in the logistics world, and it's I honestly say it's much more complex than e-commerce. That's why I'm in e-commerce today. But that's something we're seeing evolving a lot on every aspect, for even B2C and B2B. So I think it's both sides of this, it's evolving today.
Yeah, absolutely. And Derek, I think you maybe had a couple additional comments.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that for all the B2B opportunities that we hear from, we all most often said is, well, we're the best at making sure our product is delivered to our client's site within days, if not hours. Like, that's their value, that high touch. We're going to get that product to your door. We're going to make sure of it, because it's a different sales process, right, than a consumer, which is small package, and and that's their value prop. They've got that back office logistics fulfillment figured out. What they missed is the front end component to help power and drive all that. So that's the glue, is the platform at that point.
Yeah.
And again, if you think about traditional B2B, the shipping responsibility usually lies on the buyer, which is, again, completely opposite from where the B2C is today, right?
Yeah.
So there's shipping terms and FOB and docs and whatnot. So it's a whole different process in B2B, right? So, and I think it's evolving. I think today it is evolving. It's something that we really bring with us to the business life, everything we're expecting in our personal life, right? And being able to track the order, not only from shipping point, but from manufacturing point, is another big demand we're seeing in B2B, because it's usually it's almost like a house of cards that you build slowly, right? And if I have an order that I got from my end customer, I'll call it, right, and I have to go procure other things, and this is almost like a recursive problem, right, because they have to procure, et cetera, et cetera. So the whole fulfillment chain is, if one card breaks or falls, the whole thing crumbles, right? So getting this visibility on when I can expect my product is a multi-tier problem, right? How do we integrate and access this data from all the supply chain, right? And get sure that we're giving a right date. So again, it's a very different problem than in the B2C. That said, I do think that COVID did expose how fragile the whole fulfillment part of the business is and the supply chain. I think much more even than the digital, but again,
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
my field of business right now. But really going to see a lot of progress in this, I think, because we really saw during this pandemic how companies that didn't figure out disaster recovery for their supply chain suffered.
Mm-hmm.
So again, something that we're definitely going to see some movement in.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of as we start to look to wrap up our show today, just from a past show, we talked a lot with one of our other partners, 3Kit, about just augmented reality. And I'm just curious, and you mentioned this just a little bit ago, the personal experience into the business buying experience. And I think that's where augmented reality, again, a lot of times we see the technologies and innovations start in the B2C space, and then eventually it will come over into the B2B space as appropriate. But to me, a lot of discussions have centered around the opportunity for an HVAC company to have their equipment set up with an augmented reality, so I can walk up with my phone or my tablet, quickly see the unit, and I can explode it out into the parts, and I can order a part. What's your guys' thoughts on how that may come into play with these marketplaces, the opportunity for having that type of just interaction, that immersive interaction, an immersive experience as part of the B2B marketplace space? Or is that just one of those future items that, we're probably going to get there, but it's not a reality in the near term?
So I'll start by saying that I think we first have to cross the hurdle of getting good product imagery before we do augmented reality. Some of these industries, we launch website, and sometimes I log in just to check them out, and I see image placeholders for old products, and I contact our project manager or our partner and ask them what's going on. I think they forgot to upload the product imagery. And they say, well, no, they don't have any product imagery.
Yep.
So I think we are getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. That said, it's coming. There's no way that it's not going to come and join the requirements that we're going to see in the B2B and definitely in marketplaces. Again, if I can sit at home and or in my office, my home office, as we are in most people today, and really see the machine that I'm going to buy, right? And how it will plug into what I'm building, or how does the material look, or kind of measure it and work with it. It's definitely coming. We're seeing industries that already do that, right? So I think there are some industries that are much more technology oriented and do these things. And there's others that are so behind, right? But that said, again, I don't think it'll be for everybody. We have our customers that sell nuts and bolts. I don't think you'll have an augmented reality for that. It's like when we asked him, well, do you want to upload pictures? He's like, all screws look the same, It's like, that was the answer we got. Or we had a customer way back, for a long time, that sells round saws, right? And we asked, what about imagery? And they said, most of them look the same. So,
the experience.
It depends on the industry. But that's it. When you're building complex things, when you kind of kitting or configuring, definitely it will come to play. I think it's just a matter of time before we'll start seeing more and more of that.
Yeah, we've got some lower hurdles to jump before we get to AR for schematics. I mean, schematics are just difficult in and of itself. And then the shopping experience typically changes as well. I mean, how do you sell a bolt? There's a lot of great companies out there that are have an experience way different than you'd see on Amazon, right? It's you're buying by attributes, by almost taking the catalog, the print catalog, and putting it in a digital format that is digestible, right?
Yeah.
So you're selling on data, and I think the weakest part of the industry in a whole is around good data. Most companies have a SKU, a price, some inventory, and it's hard to sell that if the person doesn't know the SKU.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Well, Yoav, Derek, thank you so much for being on Lessons for Tomorrow today with me, talking about B2B marketplaces, B2B commerce. Very exciting times. A little spoiler announcement earlier on. So, Yoav, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that at the very end of the show here, and then we can send everyone off.
Well, so yeah, the two big announcements. So we've been doing marketplaces for a long time, but we are officially going to start socializing or marketing our Oro marketplace solution, and that's out, and you can learn about it on our website, oroinc.com. Our second one is we're working, I'm not ready to give it the name or name it yet, but we are definitely working on the payment side of it and really revolutionizing how B2B payments are handled, and reducing risks, like I said, and making commerce move faster. So those are the two big initiatives we're working on. A lot of other stuff, so just visit our website, oroinc.com, or contact me directly, yoav@oroinc.com, for any questions. Really, thank you so much for having me and letting me rant about B2B and B2B marketplaces. It was a real joy for me.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm sure we'll have you on as a guest again in the future, just as we continue tracking the movement that's happening in this B2B space and commerce and marketplaces especially. So with that, again, everyone listening, just thank you for your time today, talking about just insights from the past to apply in the present to achieve success in the future. And we look forward to you tuning in next.